So one of the things that really stood out to me is how few of these people that I interview are part of worshiping communities that are ordinary. In part is because they're really drawn to megachurches, to big congregations, because of the anonymity. It gives them a chance to sort of not stand out quite as much. But more than that, it's that they're really drawn to a particular church because they respect the senior minister as a leader, and they see that person as a leadership peer. That's really important. And so if they can't respect the pastor as a leader, they're not willing to sort of hitch their wagon to that particular congregation. They might out of a sense of obligation or because their kids are involved in a particular church, but more often than not, if they're engaged in a church, it tends to be a larger congregation. And we're not talking about it has to be, you know, Willow Creek or one of the biggest churches in the country. It doesn't have to be that. But there is a sense in which they really are looking for pastors who they respect as leaders. There are great leaders at churches that are the size of 300 or 400. They're not as common, but they're out there. And I did find some of those situations. The most important thing that the minister can do to sort of reaching, in those kind of contexts, reaching the particular business leader who happens to be in their midst, is recognizing that they don't call that person out on a weekly basis. They don't single that person out by examples or by illustrations, but instead really try to minister to that person one-on-one. The most effective ministry that I found that was occurring where pastors were making a real difference in the lives of these business leaders were ones who actually went and had lunch with them once a month. The pastor of a church in Indianapolis would have lunch once a month with the CEO of Eli Lilly. It was a small, intimate conversation where they would get together and just sort of talk about what's going on in life. But it was actually a very significant sort of spiritual connection in a way that made a real difference in that business leader's life and, in turn, really shaped that pastor. The pastor told me he learned more about leading a complex organization from those monthly lunches than he ever would have from a seminar he would go to or an experience, because you're getting to hear sort of decision-making at really high levels. And you're walking through that process. It's sort of like a journey. In my sense, it's the best form of discipleship and community because it's occurring organically. But it requires intentionality. The pastor has to actually sort of seek out those kind of opportunities and try to really minister in that context. So I asked the business leaders who I interviewed, how often has your minister come to meet with you at your place of work? You know, to come and see them. Out of 360 interviews, I asked that question of all those leaders. One person could cite an incident where their pastor had visited them at the workplace. But it was so meaningful, that person could recount in vivid detail. He could tell me what the pastor was wearing, where they went at his organization, what floors they visited, what they talked about. He could recount the entire lunch conversation, and it had happened something like 15 years earlier. It really stood out to him. So one very practical step that I often tell my pastor friends, if they really want to make a difference, is figure out how can you go visit your parishioners in their place of work. See what it looks like. Just get a sense of what their office is. How is it to park in their place? Those kinds of experiences help you to get to know people in very meaningful ways. And if you're pastoring a large church, it's improbable that you can do that for thousands of people. So start small. Start with your board of elders, your board of deacons, and say, I want to visit you this year. I want to come and visit your office and see what it's like. I'd like to have coffee with you. I'd like to just sort of see what it looks like. I think most pastors would be surprised how welcome that very small sign of gracious hospitality being extended, where you want to go out and visit somebody at their home, their place of work, can really make a difference.